A very good morning or a good afternoon to all, depending on where you're joining us from today. My name is Antoinette Saye. I'm a Deputy Managing Director at the International Monetary Fund. I am truly very pleased to welcome you to a discussion of a subject that has always been critical for stability and growth, but which merits even higher priority today, given our environment of a prolonged pandemic, slowing economic growth, rising inflation and debt levels across our member countries, and reduced policy space. And this topic is governance. If you want to watch the event in Portuguese, please do so on the event web page where you can switch the language. So I hope everybody is able to connect properly. So good governance, accountability, and transparency have certainly been high on our agenda at the fund for some time. And I'm delighted to welcome today a distinguished panel of speakers that will share their insights on these topics. They are Dr. Olavo Correa, Vice Prime Minister and Minister of Finance of Cabo Verde, Linda Ofori-Quafo, Executive Director, Ghana Integrity Initiative, Chris Marolang, Global Advisor and SADC Executive Director of Good Governance, Africa, and Emmanuel Jima Boadi, Co-Founder and Board Chair, Afrobarometer. So I'll first open with some introductory remarks. As the world dealt with challenges posed by COVID-19 and more recently by the war in Ukraine, we've seen that countries that have strong economic institutions have been able to mount more effective responses to these challenges. And that is true across any level of development. It is clear that institutional strength and accountability will also prove instrumental in how effectively countries recovered from these challenges and build more resilient economies going forward. Today, we launch a book on good governance in Sub-Saharan Africa. It was edited by my colleagues Monique Newiak, Alex Segura Obiago, Abdul Aziz Wan, and others across the fund. As the book makes clear, Sub-Saharan Africa has made tremendous progress in recent years in improving the standards of living of its citizens. But millions continue to face extremely difficult conditions, living in poverty and without access to sufficient public services, especially healthcare and education. And these challenges clearly intensified in recent years, given unequal access to vaccines and limited policy space. And policy challenges will become even more complex as governments contend with the effects of climate change and digitalization. So a critical element to managing these challenges and leveraging the opportunities posed by digitalization, as well as by the demographic dividend that Africa offers, is good governance and transparency in public institutions. At the same time, steadfast leadership from African policymakers will be pivotal to ensure that public resources are well used and contribute to shared and lasting prosperity. These interlinkages are also the topic of this book. How can Sub-Saharan Africa reap the dividends of good governance? So with that, let me now turn to our panelists for our discussion. All panelists have made important contributions in the areas of good governance and transparency, either as senior policymakers and or as academics, researchers, members of civil society. And we at the IMF very much value our ongoing dialogue with governments and civil society about how to improve governance and transparency. And we have a new framework that was approved by our board of executive directors in 2018 to discuss these issues. So with this context, I wanted to ask each panelist to please briefly describe the work you've been doing recently in this area and what aspects of the book you found of most immediate interest and relevance to your work. We are very interested in your views about what areas would need even more analysis in the future, and how the IMF can continue to contribute to this very productive dialogue. So I'd like to suggest that each of you take 5 minutes, maximum 10 minutes, to reflect on this question. And I hope that allows us some time then to really fully engage in a conversation that I'm sure will be of particular interest to the participants in the seminar. So with that, let me invite Honorable Vice Minister of Cabo Verde, Dr. Lavo Correa, to start us off. Please, Mr. Vice Prime Minister.
Muito boa tarde.
Good afternoon.
Espero que estejam a me ouvir.
I hope you can hear me clearly.
Yes, we can.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for inviting me to be part of this panel and to discuss issues that the book presents for Sub-Saharan Africa. This book was prepared by Monique Neviak, Alex Segura, and Abdul Aziz Wan. I would like to thank the editors for putting on our agenda a topic that is essential for the world, a topic that is extremely relevant for the African continent. Africa is the continent with the worst infrastructure in the world. But if we take into consideration the indexes, we can identify the influence of bad governance and corruption in the development of the continent. Africa loses in illicit funds $90 billion, which is about 4% of the wealth of the entire continent. The direct foreign investment in Africa is half of this amount, with $40 billion, which means that the illicit financing in Africa is the amount that Africa would need to modernize infrastructure and to drive growth in the continent, fighting poverty in our continent. The first conclusion is that corruption is one of the major bottlenecks for the development of the African continent. I agree with the editors that say that there's no such a thing as wealthy or poor countries. There are governed countries that are wealthy and badly governed countries that are poor. So the problem doesn't have to do with wealth, but with good or bad governance. So this is a very important topic. Governance has a role to drive growth in the African continent. Institutions are important to promote good governance. We also have to take into consideration governance dividends. Good governance can drive development and also talks about innovation, technology, as contributors for good governance. Cabo Verde has been taking big strides in this area of good governance. We are at a top place when we take into consideration some of the indexes for the African continent. But what is important for our country is not to be the best among the worst, but really to be among the very best. So we have to do our best to improve good governance indexes, taking into consideration 5 or 6 main points. First, education. education, access to education, access to information by all the citizens in the African continent. Human capital, community, and the elements to question and surveil good governance are essential. Second pillar is to look into institutions. Only solid institutions are able to guarantee good governance, surveillance, and also questioning and visualizing bad practices in public administration. We also have to take advantage of the digital governance so that we can promote transparency in the continent. In Cabo Verde, we are implementing a digital financial system, but also a system for the management of public acquisitions so that we can fight poor use of public resources. At the same time, it's also important to have in Africa an independent judicial system that can not only mitigate, but can also process and punish any kind of corruption acts. And also, there is another aspect that is very important, is stability in our countries, political stability, social stability, institutional stability. And in order to see this go into fruition, leadership has an additional responsibility to set an example, to teach the way towards the future in our countries, which is promoting good governance. To wrap up, one of the main bottlenecks to the development of the African continent has to do with corruption and lack of transparency. We have to get involved with good governance and involve all the international institutions, because we're all responsible, but the first people responsible for that are the African leaders, the heads of state, and this cannot come from outside. We within Africa have to acknowledge how good governance is the main issue to build a better future for our African continent. Thank you very much.
And thank you so very much, Honorable Vice Prime Minister, for starting us off in this very, very clear way, with very clear messages about what it takes to provide good governance, and the very critical importance of leadership and responsibility of leaders in that connection. A very important message, as well as all the other ones you also gave. We'll come back to some of the issues you raised in the questions, I'm hoping. So let me now invite Linda Ofori-Kwafo to make her remarks. Linda, please, the floor is yours. Virtual floor is yours.
Very much, Antoinette. Good afternoon, everyone from Ghana. I must say I'm very grateful to be part of all important discussions, and also to say to all the writers and contributors and reviewers of this book. And going through the book, I realized that our own former Auditor General, auditor, the head of the audit institution in Ghana, in the person of Mr. Daniel Domelevo, was a contributor to this book. And I was very excited reading the contributions that he made on the issue of the important role of supreme audit institutions in the fight against corruption and the promotion of good governance. I must say that as the local chapter of Transparency International, we have been doing a number of things here in Ghana. And also to say that the launch of this book is very timely, because if you followed the launch of the Corruption Perception Index for the year 2021, that actually was launched January of this year, 2022, you realize that it's revealed a decade of stagnating corruption levels and human rights abuses of democratic decline in Sub-Saharan Africa. And so for me, the timing of the launch and the many aspects is very important for us to make progress so far as the region is concerned. The fact that the region continuously actually scores the lowest so far as the CPI is concerned in the world. In 2021, we did the same. In terms of the work that we do here and the way we've been contributing to the promotion of good governance and the fight against corruption, I would say that as the local chapter of Transparency International, we have focused our work on corruption, minimizing corruption in country, and promoting good governance one way or the other. I must mention that we've been advocating for the passage of transparency enhancing legislation, and not too long ago, with the efforts of many other CSOs who were able to get the right information law passed in Ghana in the year 2029, and also implementation or became active in the year 2020. Still under the passage and review of anti-corruption legislation, we also worked together with other civil society organizations and contributed immensely to the passage of the Office of the Special Prosecutors Act in the year 2017, and actually also saw to its functioning. And I must say, as a new organization, that the office has had its own fair share of teething challenges. We are happy to say that we have a new special prosecutor, and we are sure things will bounce back and will stabilize and will be able to benefit from the purpose for which the office was created. We've also been working together with investigative journalists, and importantly, we've been working to get the corrupt public officials sanctioned, and in some instances removed from office, and in other instances to recover some stolen wealth, even though we've not been able to do much in that area of recovering of stolen wealth or unexplained wealth that public officials have been able or have managed to take away from the people of Ghana. We've also been working towards the promotion of integrity in politics, and that we focused our work in monitoring abuse of incumbency and vote buying in a number of elections that have been conducted here in Ghana, with the sole aim of ensuring a level playing field in the elections. And then most importantly for me is working together with others to build the capacity of citizens for them to conduct what we call social accountability activities. And then we've also been conducting researches and also launching the Corruption Perception Index here in Ghana on behalf of Transparency International, our parent organization. Going through the book, obviously I've not been able to read all because it's over 300 or so pages. I took interest in certain areas, and those areas have direct impact on our work. And I must say, I was very much interested in the bit that focuses on the macro physical benefits of eliminating corruption in government. And also the bit that focuses on the strong governance performance in the sub-region and Sub-Saharan Africa achievements and way forward, and then the strong performers were Rwanda, Botswana, and Seychelles. And also because if you look at the 2021 Corruption Perception Index, they are also the best performers so far as the region is concerned. So we mentioned Seychelles, Botswana, and Cape Verde performed very well on the CPI for the year 2021. I think Cape Verde, Seychelles scoring 70 out of a clean score of 100, Botswana about 50, I think 55 they're about, and Cape Verde also performing same. And for Seychelles, they've actually increased over the decade 18 points better. My own country, Ghana, has been stagnating around 40, 41 for some time now. And yet we get government officials praising their performance because they did not fall below others. And my all-time, all-important subject is the contribution of Supreme Audit institutions so far as all this is concerned. And the reasons why I think the areas I've mentioned is of importance and the areas that I think the IMF would have to do more work in, for me, breaking it down, especially focusing on the macro fiscal benefits of eliminating corruption in governments. Reason being that some way, somehow, our governments have continuously, governments in Africa and in Sub-Saharan Africa have continuously denied the fact that they are the contributors, they are the main contributors to the fact, to corruption, and also corruption and bad leadership and bad governance is the main problem there we face in the region. And for me, citizens' appreciation of how corruption contributes to bad development, low development, how corruption contributes to poor service delivery, how corruption contributes more or less to where we find ourselves or what the challenges that we have in the region is very, very important, because if we are not able to change from a bad government to a good government, we're not able to do so many things, we will need the citizen to appreciate all these and be able to contribute their own quota to help fight or minimize corruption and also promote good governance. I'm saying so because citizens still do not understand how corruption is harmful for fiscal policy, how corruption undermines government's ability to deliver effective policies and services that promote equitable and long-term economic growth. Citizens still have a challenge of appreciating how corruption distorts fiscal policies and operations, including the collection and the usage of taxes in our countries, and then how corruption even hampers central banks' operations and financial supervision. And here, thinking of how corruption, one way or the other, contributed to the banking sector crisis that we faced in our country not too long ago. And government had to pump in money in order to help save the situation. And for me, if you talk about but for corruption, we would have been able to manage COVID and all its related challenges very well. Had it not been for corruption, we would have been able to establish all the infrastructure that we needed to deal with the challenges that we face. And for me, I think we will need to do more work for citizens' appreciation. For me, it's very, very important for the kind of work we do here. We need to work with people. We need to let the people understand so that they will be able to be committed and not lose hope some way, somehow, but contribute to the fight against corruption, so we would be able to get the results that we are looking for. It is for this reason, and also, for instance, let me mention that even the important role that Supreme Audit institutions play is very, very critical. Not too long ago, we have our own head of the Auditor General actually being removed wrongfully from office, and citizens and civil society organizations coming together to have to challenge this in courts. And for many months, the cases were never called. And the time that it was called, the harm have already been done. We need to actually break these things further down for the citizens' appreciation in order to be able to mobilize their support and support of civil society organizations to be able to continuously hold our government to account, because that is all that we have. In the past, elections were used to change a bad government and also to promote good governance. I would say that in recent times, elections have become tools for recycling bad government. And so you have an election coming up in some few years or months, and you are just not even so enthused to participate in same, because obviously you will be changing from one bad government to another. These are some of the challenges that we face in Sub-Saharan Africa, and also my country inclusive, for which I think we need to do further work to break it down for citizens' appreciation in order to mobilize their support and contribution to the fight against corruption and the promotion of good governance in the region. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Linda, for your intervention, and a very powerful one with clear messages about the power of analytic work on this issue and its link, of course, to performance, to economic performance, and the need to fully amplify it by reaching out more to civil society organizations and to the public in general, as with the view to enhancing understanding of the links and then motivating efforts to really address this. So we're very grateful for that. A number of issues to come back to, including the importance of supreme audit institutions and, of course, legislation that really addresses these issues. Thank you. Let's now move to Jima Boadi, who's going to now deliver his remarks. You are on mute, Jima. Jima, apologies, you need to.
I got you, yeah. Thanks. But first of all, I was thanking you, Madam Moderator, and to the IMF for the opportunity for me to be part of this platform. And most important, to congratulate the authors of this important volume and to congratulate them for the emphasis they have placed on issues of government accountability and transparency in the book that is being launched today. For me, government transparency and accountability fundamentally means about three things. One is freedom of information, access to official information, transparency in the affairs of government, which are necessary to enable citizens and taxpayers and media to be better informed about what their governments are doing and be better positioned to hold their governments accountable. Second is whatever we do to make it safe for citizens to speak and act without fear of negative consequences. And thirdly, for government to be listening to the voices of citizens, taking account of the experiences and evaluations of citizens regarding government actions and inactions. So speaking for myself as a political scientist and a long-time analyst of Africa's democratic governance experiments over the past decades, I can say that there is good and bad news on this front in Africa today. For instance, thanks to reasonably free and fair elections and relatively free media in many countries across the continent, African citizens have some voice, with emphasis on some, voice in governance relative to the past. And it is also the case that as citizens, we know more about the goings on in our governments and in our public administration than before. And I think the Zondo Commission in the report in South Africa may be one of the most prominent examples of what I'm talking about. And indeed, some of the chapters in this book, the book being launched today, do confirm that there have been positive instances of government transparency and accountability in various countries in Africa. But I must also say that there is plenty of bad news at least from the standpoint of ordinary citizens across Africa, whose views, experiences, and evaluations we have been systematically tracking as Afrobarometer in our surveys over the years. We do have lots of evidence to show that citizens are very willing to act and engage in the public sphere and with their government. In fact, we have recorded fairly high levels of citizen activism and engagement in many, many countries. The data also, but the data at the same time also shows significant over time increases in popular demand for accountable governance. We have recorded a 12 percentage point increase in the number of adult Africans in 13 countries that we tracked between 2011 and 2021, who are saying that they prefer to have a government that is accountable, even if that government is not so strong on the delivery front, to one that is effective in delivering, but is unaccountable. We think this is a very important finding for all of us who are concerned with issues of accountable governance in Africa to take note of. Also, and most unfortunately from my standpoint, the data also reveals significant obstacles in the way of African citizens' desire to engage and demand accountability from their governments and from their duty bearers. So in the latest round of the Afrobarometer surveys, for which we have a full data set, that's around 8 surveys in 34 countries conducted between 2019 and 2021. 70% of respondents say they risk retaliation or negative consequences if they should report corruption. 70% that they fear retaliation or some other negative consequences if they should report their experience with corruption. And only 12% of our respondents in that survey, in those surveys, say their MPs listen to them most or all of the time. And only a paltry 17% say the same thing about their local government councillors. And it's important to note that these numbers have been going down rather than up. That is to say that citizens are reporting that fewer and fewer of their MPs are listening to them. So it seems to me what we need to take account of is, one, what is it that we can learn and can take from public opinion to inform public policy, to inform government reforms? And this is what generally the Afrobarometer has been about over the past 20 years or so. And that from our standpoint, no policymaking can be considered informed without being informed by public opinion. And that public opinion should be a key pillar in government decision-making, insofar as we are talking about accountable governance and responsible governance, and especially if we are talking also about participatory governance. And that policymakers who seriously ask, quote, what do citizens think and want, must turn to some form of public opinion polling, which for us and for much of Africa today means the Afrobarometer. And that it's important to ask citizens about their experience of poverty, their experience with deprivation of basic necessities of life, regardless of what the macroeconomic indicators say. It's important to ask citizens and to check the quality of the services that citizens say they are getting, rather than just looking at the mere presence or quantity of the supply of those services, such as electricity and the like. And of course, it's important to understand citizens' priorities, and particularly with respect to the issues we are discussing today. Citizens' experiences, actual experiences with corruption in their daily encounters with duty bearers and service providers, as opposed to what pundits and experts think or believe, is very, very important. A second reason why I think we need to pay attention to public opinion if we are talking of serious reforms in Africa is that it's rare for positive reforms to occur without the pressure of public opinion. And that even if reforms do occur, maybe because the country is lucky to have a visionary leader, those reforms don't stick and they don't become enforced systematically unless public opinion grows to support the same. And that we do know that public pressure can come from various sources: media pressure, election outcomes, protests in the streets, and so on. And we add the Afrobarometer as another source of pressure on government as to what to do and what not to do. I'm happy to report that, well, in some countries, in some instances, notably the government of Ghana and Sierra Leone have said that and have felt inspired to introduce some reforms to promote transparency and to curb corruption, citing Afrobarometer data, even though these reforms may have been imperfect and so on. But that is the rare case in Africa in our experience. And that sadly, many other governments do resist or have sought to discredit Afrobarometer type of data and experiences of their own citizens captured in well-conducted surveys such as Afrobarometer and also from media reports. So I have just a couple of recommendations to make for closing this gap between citizens' expectations of accountable and transparent governance versus what they think, how much of this that they think they are getting. And that by and large, transparency must be complemented by active citizen engagement in order for government to systematically deliver on accountability. So as the IMF deploys its financing and advisory tools to engage governments and to institutionalize transparency and accountability, it must seek to significantly strengthen and reinforce the citizen engagement side of the governance process. Speaking practically and more to the point, at the very least, IMF financing and advising tools must be geared towards protecting the countervailing forces within the state and society in our respective countries, particularly investigative media, whistleblowers, and the supreme audit institutions and their leadership. And that when all is said and done, Africa must see less and less of the controversial sacking of auditors general as we have recently seen in Ghana and apparently Sierra Leone. The second recommendation I want to put on the table is to make public procurement regimes, regulations, and practices far more transparent than they are today, so that interested citizens and media can monitor these processes and also press for credible enforcement of those rules, and of course, hope to see more consequential punishment for those public officials and their allies who breach these rules and regulations. I think I'll end here and come back with more, to explain more and to say more during Q&A. Thank you.
And thank you so very much, Chima, on that very clear set of remarks, of course, illustrating the power of the work that surveys that Afrobarometer puts out has, and the need to link public opinion more consistently with policy making, making sure that it's fully informed by public opinion. Thank you for the suggestions on what areas we at the IMF might look at to see if we can support the strengthening of institutions such as Auditor General institutions in particular, very relevant to our public financial management work, where we're doing work already. Well, thank you so very much for that. We now want to turn to Chris Marolang, last but not least, for his intervention and his remarks. Chris, please.
Oh, thank you very much. And let me start off by introducing myself. As was mentioned, I am Chris Marolang, Executive Director at Good Governance Africa, which is based in Johannesburg, South Africa. GGA, or Good Governance Africa, is an applied policy research think tank that is based in Johannesburg. However, we also have a presence in Nigeria, in Ghana, Ethiopia, and we hope to expand in due course to cover other areas. We basically focus on research and advocacy, and we strategically partner with both public and private sector stakeholders. But before I begin my intervention today, I really would like to thank the IMF for the invitation to participate in today's event. And I'd also like to acknowledge the wonderful work done by the editors of the book that brings us here today, Dr. Monique Niwak, Professor Abdul Wane, and Dr. Alex Segura Obiego, as well as all the individual authors who contributed to the book, reaping the benefits of good governance in Africa, which forms the core of our discussion today. I'd also like to acknowledge our moderator today, Deputy Managing Director at the IMF, Antoinette Say, as our chair of discussions, and of course, my other panelists. Just to contextualize the debate and give you a sense of how we locate the governance question. At Good Governance Africa, we define governance as simply about who gets what, when, and how. I'll repeat that again. It's about who gets what, when, and how. We describe this as the authoritative allocation of resources. And what we're really focused on is whether this process of the authoritative allocation of resources is focused on effective states, a mobilized civil society, and efficient private sector. And I think the key elements of good governance, as was mentioned in the book and certainly by my fellow panelists today, is the question of accountability and indeed transparency. In this regard, aspects around combating corruption, citizen participation, and enabling legal and judicial frameworks are central to a sound base and a foundation for good governance. So while African states should be free to choose, in our view, the type of governance systems best suited to their individual needs and context, it is clear that when these elements that I mentioned earlier are instituted, the prospects for political stability, economic growth, sustainable development increase vastly. So whether we're focusing, Chair, on the realm of peace and security, climate change resilience, adaptation, or economic development, African people seem to be faced with a host of major challenges to their future prosperity and development goals. At Good Governance Africa, at the center of our focus on governance is indeed the citizen. So while it may take innovative policies, international support, and in certain instances, political will to address each of these issues, success will ultimately be determined by the degree to which transparent, inclusive, and accountable governance institutions are placed to effectively implement them. So like Prof, who spoke just before me today, there are some positive signals that we have noted, engaged in research on, that I would like to highlight very quickly today. In the first instance, our data analysis through some of our empirical tools like the African Digital Data Bank and the Africa in Fact, which is our journal, seem to indicate an overall stagnation in the supply of democracy in Sub-Saharan Africa. And this is really spanning over, let's say, the last decade. And this tends to come, or rather focus on questions around electoral processes, pluralism, civil liberties, and political culture. So a number of other institutions, in actual fact, the Afrobarometer in their surveys also seem to indicate a decline in average governance since these statistics have been collected. So common strategies that seem to be utilized in Sub-Saharan Africa, which are touched on in the book, include processes that see intimidation being utilized, jailing of opposition figures or banning of opposition parties in extremes, internet shutdowns, and relative efforts to subvert free speech, as seen in many of our African countries, with certain leaders subverting their constitutional term limits for their constitutional gain. So while participatory politics between, let's say, the period 1990 and 2010, in many countries saw an increase in democratic participation, in many states, we still see, unfortunately, elections being manipulated to legitimate autocratic regimes or ensure dynastic succession. In many cases, elections continue to lack, in our view, critical factors to be considered, such as a free and fair and informed participation of citizens. One factor that seems to have characterized the governance conditions in some West African states has been the activities of the military, who continue to play an outsized role in political affairs, where we have seen over the last 2 years the return of the coup culture, specifically in West Africa, where militaries have seemed to be seizing power, and we've seen a number of thwarted coup attempts. It was mentioned by my colleague from Ghana that corruption continues to be a major challenge to Africa, and anti-corruptions have shown mixed results. By weakening the function of, and I think the trust of governance institutions, corruption continues to hinder the continent's progress towards peace and prosperity. If we look at the 2020 report by the United Nations Conference on Trade and Development, Africa loses about $86.6 billion US dollars. That is 3.7% of its gross domestic product annually. And this is through illicit financial flows, around double the amount the continent receives in foreign aid. So corruption ranges, in our view, at Good Governance Africa, from high-level political graft and capture of state institutions by public interests, all the way down to low-level bribes of police officers, of customs officials, encountered by citizens on a day-to-day basis. Public opinion data from 2020 seems to show that roughly 1/3 of Africans who dealt with the police in the previous year had to pay a bribe, and that the majority of citizens felt corruption had increased in their country in recent years. And this is really a statistic that we, again, derive through the work that is done by our friends and partners at Afrobarometer. Let me say, Chair, as I begin to conclude, that there are positive aspects around the state of governance. We have seen a growing demand for democracy, and this has seemed to be uniform across the continent. There are several positive developments which indicate this growing development around a need for inclusive and transparent forms of governance. And this is a positive sign. We also see judiciary standing firm against what can be described as creeping authoritarianisms and attempts by the executive to overreach. There are many examples which I'm cognizant of the time I won't touch on here. We've also noted a number of successful reformist agenda in countries like Ghana, Tanzania, and Zambia over the last decade, where political leaders and parties increasingly choose to run on anti-corruption platforms. Similarly, at the African Union, major reforms have been adopted since 2017, which are aimed at making this multilateral body more streamlined, more efficient, and they are slowly beginning to show signs of increase. One common feature is that of the youth as those who push for enhanced good governance and democratization. And I think the fact that we're seeing youth as a key agent for change in many parts of Africa is a good sign. So there are a number of positive developments. However, as I conclude, development partnerships we see through our research in Good Governance Africa are most effective when recipient countries take ownership of their development programs and build their own reform agendas rather than being passive recipients of aid. This is where GGA believes it can add considerable value to guide international partnerships, ensuring donor funding makes the greatest impact. So at GGA, we continue to work with our civil society partners, governments, and private sectors partners across the continent to develop and institute these agendas to advance inclusive, accountable, and transparent governance. I would invite you all who are watching this to go to our website at www.gga.org, where you can find more information about the various initiatives that we are involved in trying to strengthen democratic governance across our continent. I thank you, Chair.
And thank you so much, Chris, for that set of remarks. Thank you for all of the points you've highlighted there. Of course, this important one of ownership that we know is a necessary ingredient for making any sustained progress on reform efforts to deal with governance. Certainly that's been the focus of our work with African authorities in the context of the programs we're seeking to support with them to make sure that the reforms we're supporting are indeed ones that are broadly owned, and civil society has a hugely important role in that. So many of the points you've made are really important. Of course, some of the positives, the issues of some judiciaries, some judiciary institutions being able to stand up, stand firm. The importance of research and advocacy, of course, the need to continue to deal with corruption in the context of the illicit financial flows indeed are still an obstacle to raising enough resources that Africa so desperately needs. We've now gotten I think feedback that we can probably run over for about 10 or 15 minutes, because I really wanted us to have an opportunity to come back with a couple of question for each panelist, and I think everybody is able to stay to do that. So let me go to Honorable Vice Prime Minister Correa to ask. You given all of the roles that you've had in your country, central bank, governor of the central bank, director of treasury, minister of finance, now vice prime minister and minister of finance, you've sometimes worn, two hats, a political hat, clearly, as a vice prime minister, but also a lot of technical work in the context of being a governor of a central bank. And this confluence of the politics and the ability to move ahead with reform is a big one in this region, as in many other regions. But I wondered whether you could just tell us one or two particularly impactful reforms in the governance area that improved governance in your country that you're proud of, and what it took on the political side to build political consensus to be able to get that done. Because clearly that's hugely important. So anything you can tell us about political consensus, how one really builds that to enable reform.
Muito obrigado mais uma vez.
Thank you once more.
Queria desde logo dizer
I would like to start saying that it's critical that our countries be democratic countries where
eleições livres,
free elections take place, where
patuam com a boa governação posso
governments be replaced, especially if they go through bad governance, and the free access to information and political stability reign. This is critical for there to be institutional
e consensos fora do Parlamento.
organizations within and outside Parliament. Our countries,
Experiência de golpe de Estado, onde não
when they are
estabilidade institucional,
not stable, when there's the danger of coups,
e a boa
it is impossible to govern and govern well. Without democracy, without the necessary freedom and credible institutions, we cannot have a well-governed country nor a well-governed Africa. In Cabo Verde is a democracy. We've been going through elections very well, where everybody respects the results. We have been alternating,
isso tem sido muito importante para
holding power among all parties. At the same time, I would like to mention 3 reforms which are very important to promote good public governance. First of all, an integrated system of budget and financial management. Nothing at the state level can be done financially without a platform, an integrated system of financial management. Everything that can be controlled by the accounting office, by those in charge, and at the same time,
inibe, reprime, previne a corrupção
this avoids corruption,
em relação a essa matéria.
prevents corruption, and we've seen results along those lines. Second of all, electronic public accounts.
Os gestores públicos, os diretores,
The people in charge
fora
cannot make public acquisitions outside a platform that is transparent and the control of all within all phases of public accounts. Everything that the state acquires has to be shown through this platform. This prevents corruption and allows for sharing information among all actors. Third of all, the obligation of all those who hold public office
a declaração dos seus ativos,
to declare their assets
da entrada no
before they become a public servant
termo das suas funções,
and after they leave
para que o tribunal possa analisar
through a
se houve de facto o aumento
financial court
patrimônio,
so that it can be revealed whether that person has increased their assets
responder perante
And if so, how they justify it. And if they cannot justify it, the judiciary should take care of it. An additional measure, which is the basic budget law, based on programs to allow our citizens to know what the government will deliver through the execution of the budget. The budget cannot just be on paper. It is a contract with the public, with the institutions about what the government will deliver, and the citizens will have the information to scrutinize, to control, and to hold government accountable in terms of the budget and use of public monies. These are reforms that have been proven important and have allowed for Cabo Verde to be well ranked in terms of transparency and management of the public goods and in the management of public resources. Now the private sector.
Isto é fundamental para promovermos a transparência.
The private sector should be part of the governance system. This would be essential for transparency because this would lead us to integrating the private sector in the decision-making process for the res publica and any kind of accounts. This would just help with transparency and good governance in Africa, in Cabo Verde. Thank you.
Oh, thank you very much, Mr. Vice Prime Minister. Thank you for those points you've made. An important one you began with, and one that others have also underscored, I think, in our conversation so far, is the importance of effective democratic institutions in actually enabling voice and voice that then feeds into policy making around these issues. And certainly the democratic processes are not the areas of expertise of the IMF, but we understand the importance of participatory forms of government, of course, in allowing citizens to influence the policies in their countries. So we very much appreciate that. And that's a way of turning to Linda to ask her actually to speak. There are circumstances in which I think there is democracy on paper, but effectively it does not operate in the way that enhances reform. And I wondered in that context, what can be the role, you mentioned a few times the issues of Supreme Audit institutions. I know you're particularly interested in this area, and others, of course, underscore the importance of protecting auditors in their work. And what is there one can do more of to enhance the independence of audit institutions and auditors? And perhaps what role can civil society institutions like yours play in that?
Thank you very much once again, Antoinette. Let me start from the point and following what my earlier submission to say that in my opinion, and I think it's Transparency International also hold that view, that promotes transparency, accountability, and minimize corruption, and to achieve good governance in the Sub-Saharan Africa, we need to strengthen institutional checks on power, especially executive power. It's very, very critical for me. And it's at that level that I think we need to have strong supreme audit institutions, bearing in mind the functions that they play. We also need to sustain the gains of the strong governance performance so they do not decline. And so the bad performers can also learn from them. And then we need to promote citizens' relentless demand for accountability. This is very critical for me and for the work that we do at Transparency International and also from its Ghana chapter. And to strengthen institutional checks on power, there is the need for us to have public oversight bodies, including anti-corruption agencies, like the ones we have here, the Special Prosecutor's Office, the Commission on Human Rights and Administrative Justice, so many of them here. And then the work that, and also Supreme Audit Institution that I've made mention of in the past. And I realized that Professor Jimabwede also made mention of how they are sometimes wrongfully removed. It happened in Sierra Leone, I think also in Kenya, and they also went to court. And also we experienced it not too long ago in Ghana over very flimsy excuses that we think government should have done better in that direction. And we also need them to be independent because we think that the way and manner they are appointed, we have so much executive influence when it comes to how heads of independent state organizations are appointed. And for them to be independently appointed, we could have advertisements. I remember when we were having conversation on how to get a special prosecutor, we saw the site organization advocated for publicizing the positions and people applying and maybe getting an independent body to review and select the best, but yet we still have so much executive influence on who becomes the special prosecutor. And so executive and parliament playing that role, but we always know that they always go through without stress. And then we also need to resource them adequately. And the way and manner they are resourced can be a way of undermining their independence. And there is the need for us to set aside resources purposely for that so that they are not starved, because they are very, very important organizations that do not need some way, somehow, the executive approving their budgets before they do the work that they do. And most importantly for me, they need to be empowered to detect corruption and also empowered to sanction the corrupt. In Ghana, we've said in the past that the reason why we needed a special prosecutor was because the Attorney General's office, the Attorney General, who's supposed to be the government's chief government legal officer, is also appointed by the president. So then if you have an independent body, then that body should be able to do a number of things without any fear or favor. But then if we still have to go through and minimize the powers of these independent organizations, then we are back to square one without much being achieved. And important for me is the role of parliament and the courts to be vigilant, once again, in preventing executive overreach is very, very critical. And if care is not taken, we will not be able to achieve much. Even in Ghana, we have very close to, or actually a hung parliament, but we are not really seeing the benefits of a hung parliament. And then I also made mention of sustaining the gains of strong performance, and we shouldn't see them declining. I also, once again, want to make mention of Seychelles. Even in this report and in the CPI of 2021, we realized that their improvement was as a result of having extensive openness in governance and also anti-corruption reforms that they undertook. But then recently, we saw that their National Assembly actually passed a law to remove the requirement of spouses or families of high-level government officials declaring their assets, something that we'll be hoping for to achieve even in Ghana, to get the wives and spouses and relatives of public officials to declare their assets. By doing so, they have created a loophole, and if care is not taken, we will decline. And finally, the examples of Angola, where they are pursuing what we call, they are actually undertaking what we call witch hunting in persecuting leader.
Linda, thank you so very much. A number of very important points there, and ones we've taken a good note of. I think the point on appropriate resourcing of these institutions is a very important one as an ingredient into enhancing their independence. But I'm glad you also underscored not only that point, but also the importance of the non-executive parliamentarians as well, because it's one thing that if the executive alone is providing resources, but the parliament approves the budget, and it has to be such that does enhance the autonomy of these institutions, and whether parliaments are strong enough to do that, or operational, you were speaking to that as well, is an issue. This is an area that needs to be strengthened. No question about that. But thanks for all the other points you made. I'm so sorry we're really running out of time. We're already in overtime, and I really want to bring in our other two panelists. So first to Jima, Professor. You know, it was illuminating to me to learn about the work to learn more about the work of Afrobarometer, because I've been following it, but a lot that you said in your intervention, and the importance, of course, of linking the power of data and surveys in measuring public opinion, and the importance of linking public opinion into policy making. I couldn't agree more. But there is a well-informed and ill-informed public opinion, isn't there? And the question is how we work to make sure public opinion is also very well informed. In this virtual world that we live in, with social media in particular, and what efforts can be made to really educate the public in these areas more, so that when we measure their opinion, it is well considered. You're mute, Jima.
You have alluded to a very important conundrum, you know, as producers of essentially public and experiential data, and something that we think is very important, and how to prevent all of this from being abused. I mean, the first point for me to note is that, in fact, there are some of our findings which indicate public opinion to be in a direction that is not necessarily conducive to good governance or a good society. But I think leaders, of course, have a responsibility to lead and not necessarily just to follow. But on the other hand, we all, as citizens, as researchers, as producers of data, as media pundits, and indeed as development partners, we have a collective responsibility also to encourage the use of, to encourage the responsible use of data. Part of this requires a better educated citizenry, a citizenry with better capacity to make nuanced judgments about what kind of data is good data and what is bad data. It means for the media and for many consumers of public opinion data, some basic understanding of the canons of opinion polling, sampling quality, sampling representativeness, things about margins of error. You know, when we say 10% of the population said, you know, they don't want to pay taxes, what is the margin of error? What does that mean in real terms? Does it mean nobody wants to pay taxes? Or so there are ways in which we can promote the use of good data and minimize misuse of data. And that's a principal factor. And I think this requires a lot of partnerships, working with media, working with civic educators, working with all kinds of policy actors to grow first knowledge and understanding and appreciation of this type of data, and also how to use this type of data effectively and minimize abuse and misuse. But I just want to make one final point, because I do understand that as IMF, you do have limitations on how far you can go in tackling these deep political and constitutional issues. But I do think that given how much investment you have put into strengthening supreme audit institutions in Africa, it will be a shame if those institutions and their leaders are left to flail as governments have now come to feel the bite of these institutions and have come to realize that some of their misdeeds can be exposed. I think you have helped to grow these institutions, help to sustain them, and work with civil society and the public to sustain the independence and integrity of these institutions. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so very much, Jima. You make a very, very important point at the end of all the other good points you made. And that is, you know, it's not so much the IMF, but all of us have invested over many years in strengthening institutions, and certainly the conditions under which the IMF can help to do that are conditions in which there is collaboration on this issue. And we certainly see the necessity of protecting those investments we've made in autonomous, strong institutions that will ensure accountability. And we have invested a lot in this area, and we certainly want to think about ways to make sure that they continue to be effective. So we appreciated some of the advice you can give us in that direction. One of them, Linda spoke up about independence of resources for those institutions. That's certainly a very important one. You know, we've focused on the legislation as a very important piece of work on the PFM front also that is not easily, you know, changed. And so those sorts of things that are more in the province of the funds area of work and mandate, we're very happy to think anew about how much more we can do within our mandate. And we've been able to think through that. So the more we hear from you on this, the more helpful that will be. Thank you so much. So let's turn to Chris. And Chris, there are many things that you are working on and many areas of interest, including some of the work you've done in the past, including with the media in your own career. And I wanted us to maybe talk a little bit about information sharing through the media. And I referred earlier to the social media context in which we now operate. And I'm just wondering, you know, some of the education we need to do to make public opinion more informed and impactful in policy making, and the role of the media in that connection. Perhaps you can say a little bit about that, and how the fund perhaps can help to inform public opinion with its own analysis is important to us. Please. I'm afraid you also are mute.
I was just saying I will try to be very brief since I see that we are absolutely out of time. But you raise a very good point, Antoinette, in raising the crucial role of the media, especially in growing the understanding and awareness of good governance. And I'll start off by saying, in a situation where the world, and indeed Africa, has seen the rise of populism, it is very, very important in the context of what are described as alternative facts in a world where we live, where there is fake news. We see social media really being dominated by what are called bots and other agents and tools that are used to disseminate this disinformation. It's crucially important that the media steps into the role of providing information and news that is verified, that this media is independent, that this media has the ability, in actual fact, to position information to allow, let's call it audiences, that is the general citizen, the public out there in Africa, with credible, verified information. I think that what we've seen in some countries has been an attempt by governments to dominate the media space in an attempt to ensure that the information cycles, the news context is dominated by what we can describe as propaganda. I think the role of the IMF in this regard is to empower and possibly to ensure that independent media has the capacity and the wherewithal to basically engage in processes of dissemination of news and information that is free and fair and without bias or without any context or partisan interest. This, I think, is one of the key ways that we can ensure that this rise of populism that severely undermines democratic practice and pluralism can be curbed using the media.
Very, very helpful, Chris. Thank you. Thank you so much for that. Unfortunately, we've really run out of time, and I really have to say that this has been a very, very enlightening discussion. I think I really wish we had more time to delve into some questions that I have, and I'm sure the audience would be interested in putting some questions forward, but we don't. We will have to find an opportunity to come back to some of these issues with some of you and delve more into your work on this. But I think we heard clear and loud some of the messages you thought were important to send, and certainly the beginning with the minister and the very important role of the political environment to enable moving ahead, and the decisive role of political commitment to good governance. And Cabo Verde is a very good example of that. Other countries as well, and we want to certainly do what we can in our domain to strengthen the ability of citizens to influence democratic environments in their countries with economic, good economic knowledge, and being able to comment on the things that politicians are making decisions on. And the importance of strengthening institutions, the importance of strengthening their autonomy and independence, including with the proper resources. We talked quite a bit about that, and this is very important in our work on public financial management systems that the fund has invested very heavily in. And of course, the very constructive role of civil society, of all the work you do across the gamut of what you do, including in measuring public opinion through surveys and other means, is really important. We want to continue to partner with you in these areas, and to further deepen our own reflections on how the fund's work can move to the frontier as much as we can, to make sure we really take an opportunity to help Sub-Saharan Africa strengthen its institutions. So that's where we'll leave our conversation, I'm afraid, because we're way out of time. I really appreciate your willingness to stay on and continue to engage. And let me express our appreciation also to the audience for being with us, and to apologize for not being able to address their questions in this session. We'll find another way of doing so. And to say that the book we discussed today can be accessed on the IMF's website in publications and books. And it's the book is called Good Governance in Sub-Saharan Africa at imf.org. So thank you so very much, everybody. It was really my pleasure to spend this time with you today. And I hope we'll see each other soon. Bye-bye.